Hello everyone, welcome. Have you ever noticed how the more you speak about your dreams, the less energy you seem to have to chase them? There's a strange power in silence, one that Carl Jung understood deeply. In a world addicted to validation, the loudest person in the room often seems the most confident. But Jung would tell you that's an illusion. Real strength doesn't scream. It listens, it studies, and then it moves with precision. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But here's the truth. Becoming who you truly are is not a public process. It is private, it is painful, it is sacred. And when you speak too soon, when you broadcast your battles before they are won, you invite noise into your transformation. Opinions, judgments, doubts. They all become bricks on your back while you're still building. Silence is not emptiness. It is incubation. It is self-respect. The world doesn't need to know what you're working on. Let them wonder. Let your results speak a language louder than words ever could. Jung taught that the unconscious holds immense power, and to access it, you must go inward, not outward. You don't evolve by explaining yourself to others. You evolve by confronting your own shadow in the quiet. People waste their energy proving instead of improving. They want applause during rehearsal, not understanding that the stage was never meant to hear the noise of preparation. Those who win in public are those who had the discipline to focus in private. Every hour spent in solitude, every day spent sharpening your mind, every night you chose growth over gossip, it all adds up. And one day, without announcement, the world will see. You will emerge, not seeking attention, but commanding it. Not by noise, but by presence. Because those who know their power never need to advertise it. In a world that thrives on visibility, where every move is documented, posted, and praised, or criticized, it may seem counterintuitive to suggest that silence is power. Yet within the quiet, far from the noise of public opinion and constant expression, lies the true essence of strength. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist and deep explorer of the human psyche, understood this in a profound way. He believed that real transformation occurs not in the external realm of performance and applause, but in the deep interior of our unconscious mind. Silence, to Jung, was not merely the absence of sound. It was a sacred space where the self could emerge without distortion. To truly understand how silence becomes power, we must first understand the nature of the ego and the persona, two key concepts in Jung's work. The ego is the center of our conscious awareness, while the persona is the mask we wear in social settings. The persona is what we show to the world. It's how we want to be seen, but it's not necessarily who we truly are. And in a culture that rewards instant exposure, where people post their goals, intentions, and struggles for likes and validation, the persona grows stronger while the true self often stays hidden, buried beneath layers of performance. When we share too much, too soon, especially about our ambitions, we risk diluting the energy that drives those ambitions. Speaking of dreams prematurely can create a false sense of accomplishment, as though simply declaring the intention is the same as fulfilling it. But it's not. In fact, Jung would argue that this public sharing can cause a split within the psyche, pulling us further from wholeness. Our unconscious mind begins to register applause for something not yet earned, and we become more attached to the image of success than the substance of it. This dynamic builds a house of cards, fragile and easily shaken by failure or criticism. Silence, in contrast, preserves the purity of intention. It keeps your energy contained, like a fire building pressure, inside a sealed chamber. When you don't tell the world what you're working on, when you resist the urge to explain yourself or seek approval, your focus intensifies. You become sharper. You become grounded in the process rather than the perception. And in doing so, you enter a deeper relationship with your own unconscious. You start to hear the whisper of instincts, the guidance of intuition, the voice of your deeper self that often gets drowned out by external noise. Jung emphasized the importance of individuation, the journey of becoming one's truest self, but this process requires solitude. It demands stillness. You cannot become who you are meant to be while constantly performing who you think others want you to be. When you move in silence, you allow space for the shadow, the hidden parts of you, to rise to the surface. And while the shadow is often uncomfortable, filled with repressed fears and flaws, it is also the key to your strength. To integrate the shadow is to reclaim the parts of yourself that you once denied. This work is deeply personal and vulnerable, and it cannot be done in the spotlight. Silence becomes the container for this transformation. The modern world, however, is not built for silence. We are conditioned to share, to overshare, to constantly narrate our lives in bite-sized updates. And while connection is important, not all things are meant to be public. The soul's evolution is not a performance. Some things must remain sacred, especially the things that are still forming. Seeds do not grow when exposed to harsh light too soon. They need darkness. They need protection. And so do your goals, your growth, your healing. There is also a strategic dimension to silence. When others don't know what you're working on, they cannot sabotage it, intentionally or unintentionally. You remove unnecessary commentary, doubt, envy, or even well-meaning advice that can cloud your clarity. Jung understood that people project their own fears and limitations onto others. If you tell someone you're trying to build something extraordinary, their response will often reflect their own belief systems, not your potential. And if you're not rooted in silence and self-trust, those projections can seep into your unconscious and subtly derail you. In silence, you learn to trust yourself. You begin to realize that your worth is not tied to others' recognition of your journey. You understand that mastery requires time, repetition, failure, and refinement, none of which are glamorous and none of which benefit from public attention. The craftsman in the workshop, the writer in the middle of a lonely draft, the athlete training in the off-season, all are practicing the art of silent strength. They are not performing, they are preparing. And when the time comes, they will emerge not with empty declarations, but with undeniable results. Jung also spoke of synchronicity, those moments of meaningful coincidence that seem orchestrated by something beyond logic. These often occur when we are quietly aligned with our path, not broadcasting it, not trying to control the outcome through explanation. Silence aligns you with flow. It opens space for guidance that cannot be summoned in noise. You notice more, you feel more, your inner world becomes more vivid, more ordered. This is not mystical fluff, it's psychological truth. The unconscious cannot speak to you when you are distracted, but in silence, it becomes a wellspring of insight and resilience. People often misunderstand silence as weakness or indecision, but Jung would remind us that true power is always hidden. The strongest trees have the deepest roots, and roots grow in darkness. The mind that does not react, that does not need to constantly prove itself, is the mind that holds real influence. Power that must announce itself is insecure. Real power moves quietly until it no longer needs to move at all. It simply is. There's a quote attributed to Jung: "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." This awakening happens in silence. When you stop explaining, stop defending, stop announcing, you begin to hear your real voice. Not the voice shaped by others' expectations, but the voice born of stillness, purpose, and inner alignment. That voice is your guide. And once you learn to follow it, without needing applause or permission, you step into a level of power that no one can take from you, because no one gave it to you. There is a reason why real growth feels lonely, quiet, and at times invisible. It does not happen in front of an audience. It happens in private, often without anyone noticing, and sometimes without even you realizing it, until the moment you see how far you've come. Carl Jung, one of the most profound thinkers in the history of psychology, emphasized that human development is not about adding layers to our identity, but peeling them back. True growth is not something you build up externally like armor or status. It is something you uncover from within. It is not an achievement to show off, but a state of alignment that must be earned in silence, shadow, and solitude. Modern life often presents the illusion that progress is measured by external markers: titles, accomplishments, appearances, numbers. But Jung's work reminds us that these are merely projections, and projections can be deceiving. The psyche doesn't care how many followers you have or how busy your calendar looks. It cares about balance, wholeness, and authenticity. Inner growth does not need validation. In fact, the more you grow, the less you crave being seen, because you begin to realize that becoming who you are is a sacred task, not a public event. According to Jung, the unconscious mind holds the keys to our full potential, and growth means integrating its contents with our conscious awareness. This is not a smooth or linear process. It is disruptive. It challenges your self-image. It humbles your ego. When you start to grow internally, you will often feel worse before you feel better, not because something is wrong, but because something buried is coming to the surface. These moments of discomfort are actually signs of deep psychological movement. Yet the world outside rarely acknowledges this kind of work, because it cannot be easily measured or understood. It doesn't look like success. It doesn't always feel like clarity, but this inner growth is what ultimately shapes the outer world, not the other way around. Jung wrote extensively about individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole. This doesn't mean becoming perfect. It means becoming real, and reality, in its rawest form, is not always pretty. To grow is to confront what you've avoided, to meet the parts of yourself you'd rather deny. It is to look into the mirror of the unconscious and see your contradictions, your fears, your wounds. This kind of internal work cannot be done under bright lights or public scrutiny. It requires privacy, reflection, and deep honesty. Most of all, it requires the willingness to sit with yourself without distraction or excuse. We live in a world that glorifies hustle and visibility. Everyone wants to be seen achieving, speaking, sharing, branding. But true psychological growth rarely happens when you are focused on appearances. You cannot edit your shadow. You cannot filter your pain. You cannot perform healing. You can only experience it, and that experience often asks you to step away from the noise and into stillness. That's where the truth emerges, not the truth of the world, but the truth of your soul. And once you begin to see it, you cannot unsee it. Jung observed that most people are unwilling to meet their shadow, the dark unconscious aspects of the self. But it is precisely through that confrontation that growth takes place, not through denial, and certainly not through projection onto others. The temptation is always to externalize our problems, to blame, to avoid, to distract ourselves with other people's lives. But the moment you turn inward and say, "What is this teaching me about myself?" that's when growth begins, and nobody sees it. There are no fireworks when you realize you've been self-sabotaging. There are no standing ovations when you choose to take responsibility for your triggers instead of projecting them. There is only the quiet inner shift, the click inside your mind, the soft courage of self-awareness. That's where the real power lies. This internal journey often creates a tension between who you have been and who you are becoming. It can feel like a psychological death. Jung described this as a necessary part of transformation. The old identity must break down to make space for the new. But in that in-between space, you feel ungrounded. You no longer fit into the old version of yourself, but the new version hasn't fully arrived. There's no map for this terrain. There's no applause for this transition. But it is here, in this invisible liminal space, that your foundation is being rebuilt, not on external structures, but on internal truth. The people around you might not understand it. They might question your silence, your distance, your shift in energy, but inner growth does not require explanation. It does not require permission. In fact, the more you try to explain your internal process to those who have not yet begun theirs, the more resistance you will meet. Jung would likely say that your growth reflects back to others what they have not yet faced in themselves. This is not something to fear, but something to accept. Your job is not to convince the world of your transformation. Your job is to live it. As you evolve internally, your values change. What once excited you may now bore you. What once triggered you may now feel irrelevant. You begin to see the games people play, the performances, the posturing, the projections, and you no longer want to participate. This isn't arrogance, it's alignment. You no longer need to win arguments or prove your worth. You no longer chase what isn't meant for you. You no longer tolerate chaos just to feel connected. That peace you start to feel, even when things are imperfect, that's the evidence of internal growth. And while the world may not celebrate it, your soul does. This kind of growth also teaches you compassion. When you've done the hard work of facing yourself, you recognize that everyone else is on their own path, battling their own unconscious demons. You stop judging as harshly, you start listening more, you become less reactive and more reflective. You don't need to control outcomes because you trust your own center. This internal sturdiness is something that no one can give you, and no one can take away. Jung knew that integration was the ultimate goal of the psyche, not compartmentalization, not perfection, integration, the ability to hold all of who you are, the light and the dark, the joy and the pain, the strength and the vulnerability, without splitting, denying, or disowning. When you do this inner work quietly and consistently, it starts to show, not in what you say, but in how you move. You walk differently. You speak with more clarity. You radiate something that cannot be faked, congruence. And people may not know what changed, but they will feel it. Growth happens internally because that is where your patterns are born. That is where your fears are rooted. That is where your beliefs are stored. If you want to change your life, you must start where the life is truly lived inside. This is not a message that sells easily in a world obsessed with instant results and public displays of progress. But it is a truth that Carl Jung devoted his life to exploring, and one that remains as relevant today as ever. So while the world is busy trying to look like it's growing, let yours happen in silence. Let it be messy, confusing, raw, and unseen. Let it be slow. Let it be yours. Because when you grow from the inside, the outside eventually aligns. But if you try to do it the other way around, you will forever be chasing peace that can only come from within. In a time where every opinion can be posted and every achievement can be broadcast, the desire for external validation has never been stronger or more deceptive. Social media, cultural conditioning, and even the educational system have taught us, often subtly, that our worth is confirmed by how others respond to us. We are praised when we succeed, liked when we share, followed when we impress. Yet Carl Jung, in his deep exploration of the human psyche, warned us of the dangers of this dependence. To Jung, the search for validation outside oneself was not only a distraction. It was a distortion. It pulls us away from the path of true individuation, the process by which we become whole, real, and complete within ourselves. Validation, in its most innocent form, is the desire to be seen and affirmed. As children, this need is natural. We look to our parents, teachers, and peers to tell us we are good, capable, and lovable. But what begins as a mental need often becomes a lifelong craving. It morphs into a compulsion to be liked, to be accepted, to be approved of even at the cost of our truth. Jung believed that the self is the totality of the psyche, both conscious and unconscious. And when we seek our identity from external sources, we betray the self by constructing a false image, a persona, crafted to please others but estranged from our inner reality. This is the beginning of the split, the divide between who we really are and who we think we need to be. The more we chase validation, the further we drift from authenticity. We shape our thoughts to match popular opinion. We adjust our behaviors to avoid judgment. We mute our voice to maintain acceptance. And in doing so, we feed the ego while starving the soul. Jung warned that the ego, left unchecked, will always seek to reinforce its own image. It wants to be admired. It wants to be right. It wants to be in control. But the ego is only a fragment of the self. When we allow it to dominate, especially by feeding on the reactions of others, we become shallow, reactive, and disconnected from our depths. One of Jung's most powerful ideas is that real transformation requires turning inward, not outward. The inner life is rich, complex, and often uncomfortable. It holds our fears, our doubts, our wounds, and our longings, but it also holds our power, our truth, and our creative force. When we seek validation, we bypass this inner world. We look outside for answers, thinking someone else knows better. We rely on applause as a measure of worth, but this is an illusion. The crowd is fickle, trends change, approval fades. If your identity depends on someone else's perception, it is never stable. You are only as secure as your last compliment. True growth demands that we detach from the need to be understood, liked, or praised. Jung saw this as essential to the process of individuation. You must be willing to walk alone, to listen to your own voice, to honor your own instinct, even when they contradict what others expect from you. This is not rebellion for its own sake. It is alignment with the self. And it requires tremendous courage, because the path of authenticity often invites misunderstanding. When you stop seeking validation, you stop managing your image. You let go of performance and step into presence. You no longer need to manipulate perception, because your worth is no longer up for debate. The need for validation is often rooted in fear. Fear of rejection, fear of inadequacy, fear of being alone. But these fears lose their grip when you turn toward them, instead of trying to cover them with applause. Jung believed that the shadow, the unconscious part of ourselves we hide, contains the very material we need to become whole. And often, our hunger for validation is part of that shadow. We don't want to admit how much we crave approval. We tell ourselves we're being humble or social or strategic, when in fact we are just afraid of being unseen. But growth comes from facing that fear directly. When you admit to yourself, yes, I want to be liked, and then ask, but do I need to be, you begin to loosen the grip of external opinion. There is immense freedom in being misunderstood. It means you are no longer trapped by the expectations of others. It means you have claimed your right to think, speak, and live in ways that may not be universally accepted. Jung did not advocate arrogance or isolation, but he insisted that we cannot become ourselves if we are constantly trying to fit in. The self is not discovered in consensus. It is found in solitude, silence, and often tension. When you no longer need the world to clap for your existence, you begin to exist in a more powerful, undisturbed way. This doesn't mean you never listen to feedback or that relationships don't matter. Jung valued human connection deeply, but he made a distinction between connection and dependence. You can care for others without becoming imprisoned by their opinions. You can serve without seeking applause. You can create without chasing recognition. In fact, the most meaningful contributions often come from those who are deeply connected to their inner purpose, not public approval. Their work is not shaped by market trends, algorithms, or applause meters. It is shaped by soul, and soul doesn't care about being popular. It cares about being true. When you live without needing validation, you become more present. You begin to act from your center, not from your insecurity. You speak because you have something to say, not because you want to be liked. You create because something inside you needs to come alive, not because you're chasing viral status. This shift transforms not only your inner world, but your impact. People feel the difference. Authenticity resonates in a way performance never can. When your words and actions come from a place of internal alignment, they carry a frequency that goes beyond charm or charisma. They hold power, and yet, this path is not easy. There will be moments when silence feels unbearable, when the absence of affirmation feels like rejection. You will question yourself. You will wonder if it's worth it. But those are the very moments when the old structures of self are breaking down. The version of you that needed to be liked is dying so that a deeper version can be born. That process is sacred. It cannot be rushed. And it cannot be witnessed by others because it is yours alone. Jung often spoke of the inner guide, the deep voice within that knows who you are, even when you forget. That voice becomes clearer when you stop chasing external noise. When you sit in your own presence without needing a mirror. When you stop asking, "What will they think?" and start asking, "What do I know to be true?" That voice does not flatter you. It does not seduce you with applause. It grounds you. It humbles you. It anchors you in something far more lasting than praise, purpose. This inner shift, from seeking to knowing, is where real confidence comes from. Not the loud, attention-grabbing kind, but the quiet, steady kind. The kind that doesn't need to argue, impress, or defend. The kind that simply is. It's the confidence of someone who has nothing to prove, because they've already made peace with themselves. And when you reach this place, validation becomes irrelevant. Not because you've stopped caring entirely, but because you've stopped depending. You welcome support, but you don't require it. You appreciate recognition, but you don't chase it. You are no longer starving for something the world can never fully give you, permission to be whole. So if you find yourself constantly seeking approval, constantly adjusting your truth to be accepted, pause, listen, not to the crowd, but to the quiet voice within. What does it know that you've been ignoring? What parts of you have been hidden in exchange for belonging? What would you say or do if no one was watching, if no one was clapping? That is the direction of your freedom. That is the beginning of self-realization. Jung's work reminds us that the most important relationship we will ever have is the one we have with ourselves, and that relationship cannot thrive on external input. It requires stillness, honesty, and courage. To grow beyond the need for validation is to step into your own authority. It is to become sovereign, not in dominance over others, but in deep inner clarity. And in that space, you no longer perform for the world. You live fully and freely from your own source. There is an invisible currency we spend every day, often unconsciously, our energy. Unlike money, which can be earned, saved, or borrowed, your psychological energy is finite. It determines your focus, your emotional clarity, your capacity to create, and your ability to navigate life. Carl Jung understood this deeply. In his writings and reflections, Jung emphasized that our psychic energy, what he called libido, in his earlier works, is not just a sexual or physical force, but a symbolic, vital essence. It's the force that animates our thoughts, sustains our imagination, powers our emotional resilience, and determines the health of our inner world. Yet, in today's overstimulated, performative society, we spend this energy recklessly, bleeding it into distractions, validations, conflict, and overexposure. The world is not short on noise. From the moment we wake up, we're hit with an avalanche of information, demands, opinions, and comparisons. We are taught to stay connected at all costs, to respond immediately, to engage constantly. But Jung would argue that to preserve the integrity of the psyche, we must withdraw from the superficial and attend to the essential. Energy is sacred because where your attention goes, your life goes. What you give energy to grows. What you starve of energy fades. Most people don't burn out because they do too much. They burn out because they give too much of themselves to things that do not matter. Energy protection is not about becoming indifferent or disengaged. It is about discernment. It is about realizing that not every argument deserves a response, not every invitation requires attendance, and not every relationship is meant to be carried. Jung knew that the unconscious absorbs what we expose ourselves to. When we are constantly giving our time and thoughts to meaningless or chaotic things, we clutter the psyche with noise. The mind becomes restless. The emotions become unstable and the connection to the self weakens. The result is confusion, exhaustion, and a deep sense of disconnection from our true center. Jung's process of individuation, the journey toward becoming a whole and integrated self, requires energy. And not just any energy, but focused inward, grounded attention. You cannot do the work of deep inner transformation when you are constantly distracted or emotionally entangled with the world's drama. Just as a plant needs undisturbed soil and adequate sunlight to grow, the psyche needs undisturbed focus and intentional solitude. Every time you engage in meaningless conflict, doom scroll through social media, or try to please everyone around you, you are spending this internal currency. And, unlike a financial budget, you often don't realize the cost until you feel the consequences. Emotional numbness, mental fog, and spiritual fatigue. Carl Jung once said, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." This awakening, this inner clarity, demands energy. And the more you give your energy to the outer world, seeking approval, chasing validation, battling opinions, the less you have available for the deeper work. Protecting your energy means understanding that your focus is a form of power. It is not a passive state, it is a creative force. What you focus on becomes part of your inner reality, and if you give your energy to chaos, you will eventually feel chaotic. If you give it to fear, you will feel anxious. But if you give it to stillness, truth, creation, and reflection, you will become more whole. We often associate power with control over others. But Jung would argue that real power comes from mastering your inner economy, learning how to spend your attention wisely, how to pull back when needed, how to conserve your psychic resources for things that matter. Not everything requires a reaction. Not everyone deserves access to your mind. Not every trend needs your commentary. Silence, in this sense, is not withdrawal. It is strategy. It is preservation. It is how you keep your fire lit in a world that wants to burn you out. There is also a spiritual dimension to this. Energy, in many ancient traditions, is life force. When you waste it, you diminish your connection to meaning. When you guard it, you increase your sensitivity to depth. Jung believed that humans have an innate need for meaning, and that much of our suffering comes not from pain itself, but from meaningless pain energy spent in directions that have no return. The more you engage in what is not aligned with your soul, the more fatigued you become. And fatigue isn't just physical, it is existential. It is the feeling of moving through life without direction, of pouring yourself into tasks, people, and systems that leave you emptier than before. Energy leaks are subtle. They happen in overthinking, in replaying conversations that are over, in trying to convince people who don't want to understand, in attaching to roles or personas that no longer serve us. They happen when we say yes to things we don't want, when we ignore our intuition, when we scroll for hours numbing a truth we're not ready to face. Jung would encourage us to ask, why do I continue to spend myself in ways that deplete me? What am I avoiding within by focusing so much without? Often, It's the fear of facing our own shadow, the unintegrated, hidden parts of ourselves that we project onto others. But the work of reclaiming your energy starts by reclaiming your attention from the external world and bringing it back home to your own psyche. This kind of inner work is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not need to be seen. In fact, it thrives in silence. When you protect your energy, you create a sacred space within you, free from noise, free from performance, free from artificial urgency. In that space, you can hear your intuition. You can feel what is true. You can connect to your deeper purpose. And from that space, your outer life begins to shift. Not because you forced it, but because you aligned your energy. People who protect their energy move differently. They are not hurried. They are not easily provoked. They are not addicted to being seen. They understand that peace is not the absence of chaos, but the refusal to entertain it. They do not chase every opportunity. They do not explain themselves to everyone. They do not respond to every critic. They are not hard or closed. They are simply clear. They know what drains them and what nourishes them. They know when to speak and when to remain silent. They know when to act and when to rest. This clarity is the fruit of energetic discipline. Jung taught that the goal of life is not perfection, but wholeness, and wholeness requires integrity, the alignment of your energy, values, and actions. When your energy is scattered, you lose integrity. You say things you don't mean. You do things that don't feel right. You lose the thread of your own becoming. Protecting your energy is, in essence, protecting your ability to stay connected to who you are. It is not selfish, it is necessary, because when your energy is preserved, your soul is stronger, and when your soul is strong, you can serve others from overflow, not depletion. In a world that wants your reaction, your urgency, your visibility, choose stillness. In a culture that profits off your distraction, choose presence. In relationships that demand your constant availability, choose boundaries. This is not withdrawal from life. It is devotion to your deeper life. The one that cannot be seen, but always felt. The one that sustains you when applause fades and noise dies down. The one that knows what you truly are. Jung's legacy teaches us that becoming oneself is not a performance, but a pilgrimage. And every step of that journey requires energy. You cannot afford to spend it on what dims you. You cannot afford to pour it into illusions. You cannot afford to burn yourself out proving your worth. You are already worthy. Your job is to conserve the energy needed to live that truth fully, bravely, and quietly. We live in a world overflowing with voices, many speaking loudly and often, but few speaking with depth. Everyone has something to say, an opinion to share, a claim to make. There is pressure to declare your purpose, showcase your process, prove your passion. But amid this noise, the ones who move the world are rarely the ones shouting the loudest. More often than not, they are the quiet builders, the ones who don't speak of what they're doing, because they're too immersed in doing it. The ones whose work does the talking. Carl Jung understood this deeply. In the realm of psychological growth and spiritual evolution, he taught that the truest movements are inward and the most powerful transformations happen far from the public eye. To speak is easy. To impress with words, to project knowledge, to perform confidence. These are things anyone can do with a bit of training or practice. But to act in alignment with your truth, to build something meaningful without demanding recognition, to persist in your work regardless of praise or validation, this is something rarer and far more powerful. Jung believed that transformation occurs not through declarations but through integration. It is not enough to say who you are or who you want to become. You must live it. You must embody it. And embodiment is not noisy. It is rooted. It does not seek the spotlight. It simply exists, unshaken, like a mountain surrounded by wind. The temptation to talk about your goals, to explain your plans, to share your ambitions with the world can be overwhelming. It gives a momentary feeling of momentum. It satisfies the ego, makes us feel productive, seen, acknowledged. But Jung would remind us that much of this is illusion. Talking about your purpose is not the same as living it. Announcing your intentions is not the same as taking quiet, disciplined action toward them. In fact, the more we speak of what we haven't done yet, the more we risk dispersing our psychic energy, releasing it into the world instead of concentrating it on the work that needs to be done. This is why silence is powerful, not silence as suppression, but silence as sacred focus. When you hold your vision close, when you nurture your path without exposing it prematurely, you preserve its energy. You give your dreams the time and space to mature. Like seeds planted underground, they need darkness and stillness to grow. Speaking too soon can expose them to harsh winds. Seeking praise too early can distort your purpose. Jung warned that the ego, when unchecked, always wants to be seen, applauded, affirmed. But the self, the deeper, wiser part of you, wants only to become what it was always meant to be. And that process doesn't need an audience. It needs devotion. When you do your work without the need to announce it, you cultivate internal strength. You develop discipline that does not depend on external rewards. You begin to move from a place of authenticity, not approval. This is what Jung referred to as individuation, the process of becoming a unique, whole individual, separate from the collective persona and its expectations. True individuation is silent, invisible, and deeply personal. It cannot be performed. It cannot be explained in a social media caption. It is lived through action, through integrity, through the daily decision to return to your craft, your calling, your truth, even when no one is watching. In a culture obsessed with outcomes and optics, it can feel counterintuitive to stay quiet. You may wonder if your work will be noticed, if your efforts will be recognized, if your silence will be mistaken for passivity. But consider this: the most enduring works of art, architecture, philosophy, and spirituality were not made in front of crowds. They were created in solitude, shaped by unseen hours of effort and reflection. The builders did not pause to gather likes or followers. They were driven by something deeper, an inner imperative that could not be denied. And because their work was born of silence, it carried substance. It still echoes today. There is a kind of quiet confidence that develops when you no longer need to speak about what you're doing. You stop trying to impress. You stop measuring yourself by how many people are watching. You begin to trust the process. You begin to realize that mastery is not about attention. It's about consistency. And consistency, Jung might say, is a kind of prayer. It is the daily offering you make to the self you are becoming. It is how you bridge the gap between who you were and who you are meant to be. This is not glamorous work. It is not fast. It is not loud. But it is real. And in the end, it is the only thing that matters. Your work, when it is true, does not need explanation. It carries its own weight. It reveals your character, your values, your level of self-awareness. It speaks of your discipline, your resilience, your courage. You do not need to explain who you are when your work already reflects it. When your actions align with your words, when your creations reflect your inner depth, when your presence is anchored in your practice, people can feel it. There is a gravity to you, a credibility that cannot be manufactured or marketed. It is the credibility of someone who has done the work, silently and consistently, without needing applause. Jung warned of the danger of mistaking performance for transformation. You can speak of love and be filled with resentment. You can preach peace and live in chaos. You can talk about healing and avoid your own shadow. Real growth is measured not by how you speak, but by how you live. Not by how you are seen, but by how you show up when no one is looking. This is why your work, not your words, is the true mirror of your evolution. It reveals whether you are living from ego or essence, whether you are building illusions or foundations, whether you are chasing attention or honoring your soul. There will be times when the silence feels heavy, when you want to be seen, when you feel invisible. These are the moments when the ego panics, fearing irrelevance, fearing being forgotten. But the soul is not afraid of invisibility. It knows that the greatest movements begin in quiet. The caterpillar dissolves in the cocoon. The roots grow deep before the tree rises. The artist struggles alone before the masterpiece emerges. Jung would say that the unconscious is always at work beneath the surface, shaping and guiding you if you let it. But you must be willing to stay in the process, to trust the silence, to allow your work to become the voice of your becoming. Protect your craft, not just the product, but the process. Guard the sanctity of your practice from the eyes that do not understand it. Don't explain your path to those who haven't walked it. Let your work speak for itself. Let your consistency do the talking. Let your discipline be your response. You owe no one your plans, only your results. And those results, when they emerge, will carry the weight of truth, because they were not built for applause. They were built in service to something higher, your calling, your conscience, yourself. Jung's legacy reminds us that truth does not need volume to be powerful. Silence is not weakness, it is potency held in reserve. Stillness is not stagnation, it is preparation. Your work, when it is honest, becomes a transmission. It carries your essence into the world, whether or not you speak. And the impact of that transmission, when born of silence and integrity, can ripple further than any loud proclamation ever could.